you've taken the time to be here with us, and we hope that this presentation will be informative and will support you in your practice. In today's session, we will be presenting national learning into the National Review into the murders of Arthur Labinjo-Hughes and Star Hobson. That report was published in May 2022. We will also be looking at the City and Hackney Safeguarding Children's Partnership Child Q report published in March 2022. And we will also be looking at the independent review of children's social care published in May 2022. Each of these reviews are significant reviews which will have implications for the future of child safeguarding. And this briefing will be an opportunity to introduce the key themes and learning, including recommendations emerging out of these system-wide reviews. Each attendee will receive a PDF of the PowerPoint presentation, and many of the reports, in fact, all of the reports are available online. Some of them are indeed available from the Safeguarding Children's Partnerships website. And so, without any further delay, by words of introduction, I'd like to share a summary of the National Review into the murders of Arthur Labinjo-Hughes and Star Hobson. Just by way of some key findings and core issues, you will not be surprised by some of these. These are some of the perennial issues that safeguarding partners and systems have to address. Weaknesses in information sharing and information seeking between agencies. Errors in thinking, including a lack of robust critical thinking and challenge within and between agencies, compounded by a failure to trigger statutory multi-agency child protection processes at key moments. I'm hearing some feedback. Again, can I request that colleagues put themselves on mute to avoid disruption and distraction. Thirdly, the review found a need for sharper specialist child protection skills and expertise, especially in relationship to complex safeguarding, assessment and decision making, and including engaging with reluctant parents and understanding the daily life of children, particularly those who experience domestic abuse. The review found that at its heart, child protection practice requires consummate skill in blending care and control functions, helping families to protect children. This can only be achieved by building trusting relationships with parents and children, whilst recognizing that how things appear may not be the reality of the child's experience. It also involves the well-honed ability to understand diverse and different communities, being able to reflect on how biases and cultural assumptions about, for example, ethnicity, sexual orientation may shape judgments and decisions. And this review found that there has been insufficient attention to and investment in securing the specialist multi-agency safeguarding expertise required for undertaking investigations and responding to significant harm in cases of abuse and neglect. Again, a plea for everyone, please put yourself on mute. I'm hearing people moving in the background. So if you can do that, that would be incredibly helpful to us all. The review found some national systemic factors that impacted on the quality of practice in these two cases. The review highlights two important factors, which are: number one, multi-agency arrangements for protecting children are more fractured and fragmented than they should be. There's a great deal of variability in the quality of safeguarding practice and system-wide leadership across our safeguarding system. Secondly, there has been insufficient attention to an investment in, and as I've said, securing the specialist multi-agency expertise required for undertaking investigations and providing effective responses to significant harm from abuse and neglect. And that on the basis of that, the panel and their report is recommending that a multi-agency child protection unit be established across the UK in every area, which would be integrated and co-located at multi-agency teams staffed by experienced child protection professionals. So let's have a detailed look at the findings in this case. And this relates, the findings now relate to practice and practice knowledge. The review found that there was limited direct work with families. For example, in Arthur's case, it was often the voice of his father that was heard by professionals rather than Arthur's own voice. Related to this, there was a lack of reflection and further exploration into how the children and families presented themselves during visits. And it goes back to that point that was made originally, that how things seem may not actually be how things are. And therefore, a higher level of professional curiosity is required if we are to get to the reality of children's lived experience. The review found that there were failures to talk with and listen to the views of wider family members. Different family members raised concerns about the potential abuse with police, social care professionals on multiple occasions in both cases. However, despite family members knowing the children well, their voices were not heard. In Arthur's case, the concern and uncertainty on the causation and timing of Arthur's injuries should have prompted the strategy discussion and emotional advice from health professionals. Instead, it was concluded that the bruises seen in the photographs presented by the families could be consistent with the parents' explanation of the injuries being caused by a play fight between the two boys. Accordingly, it was decided that no further investigation was needed. In Starr's case, photographs taken during the period of the review recovered as part of the police investigation show a sad child with many bruises on her legs and arms and face. These photographs were in stark contrast to earlier photographs of a happy child taken by her extended family. Recovered CCTV footage on September the 13th, when Starr was in the sole care of Savannah, one of her partner's, her mother's partner, showed the child being physically assaulted by Savannah with 20 separate blows to the head and body recorded over the period of 2 hours. And so the point here is that it's so important to listen to the concerns that are being expressed by wider family who know and love the child. There were also gaps in specialist skills around interrogating and analysing evidence. The versions of events given by parents were too readily accepted, and photos provided by the wider family members were not properly examined and attended to. So detailed findings going forward. In addition to what we've already said, in both cases, professionals were kept at arm's length by those who were perpetrating the abuse. So missed visits, disguised compliance, not allowing the children to be seen alone. For example, professionals were prevented from coming into contact with a child, or consent was not given to share information. Practitioners' biases and assumptions impacted how they assess risks to the child and made decisions about their safety. So biases around the fact that the family were judged to be malicious and making malicious allegations. Biases around sexuality, in the fact that Starr's mother was in a lesbian relationship with her partner who was perpetrating the physical abuse towards Starr. And when professionals were given the views of the family and heard the views of the family, the mitigating circumstance was, well, they don't like us because they're homophobic. The risk posed by new partners was not fully considered. For example, a range of historic and and current domestic abuse issues were present in both cases. And this is about practitioners learning from history. So where a new partner is involved, there needs to be professional curiosity about who is this person and what is their capacity to provide care. Are there any historical indicators that would give us cause for concern, using the safeguarding adage that the best indicator of present and future harm is past harm. The risks posed by these new partners to the children were not fully explored in both cases. Looking now at systems and processes, in Arthur's case, the photos of bruising received by the police was not passed to the multi-agency safeguarding hub. That's the MASH, which would be in Surrey, the CSPA. Also, background information regarding the father's partner, who was later found to be the main perpetrator of abuse, was not included in the screening ahead of the home visits, which then raises the issue of the importance of really effective multi-agency information sharing in the front door whenever we are making an initial assessment. There were limited opportunities for professionals to consider the informational togetherness and assess risks and the use of strategy meetings. And when we talk about informational togetherness, it is that the understanding that all of us have a particular view of a child or a family. And it's only when the collective information is analyzed together that we're able to form a comprehensive understanding of what may be going on in the life of that child and that family. And so strategy meetings, multi-agency meetings are incredibly important for us to be able to formulate a view as to what the current risks and current safety within the family, and also formulate hypotheses as to the nature of the harm that the child may be experiencing. So, for example, in Starr's case, professionals tended to interpret information based on its source, that is the wider family, who were supposedly malicious referrers, rather than the substance. So what we want to see the inverse of that. What is the substance of what is being said? What is the nature of harm that is being alleged, rather than who is alleging the harm? What is the evidence space for the harm that is being alleged, and exploring that fully? Moving from systems and processes now to leadership and culture. And this really is where the safeguarding partnership comes more into fore, and the leadership of safeguarding arrangements. What the review found is that safeguarding partners did not have a clear enough understanding of child protection practice, which impacted the delivery of routine services and caused staffing issues to remain unresolved. So it's so important as a safeguarding system, we are close to practice, that we're listening to practitioners, that we have a clear sense of the understanding of the quality of practice, what is working well, what needs to be improved, and what action is being taken to make the required improvements. There was an absence of an agreed partnership vision. And within that is, so for example, what is the partnership there to achieve, which impacted on the delivery of services and therefore outcomes for children. The review found that opportunities for meaningful supervision and learning were limited in both cases, and learning was not a constant feature of professional life for social work practitioners. Moving on to the recommendations, beginning first with what they call the core recommendation. And the core recommendation is to develop an approach to undertaking child protection work that is fully integrated. Multi-agency investigation and decision-making should take place throughout the entire child protection process. And this is opposed to child protection processes being led and driven by children's social care, possibly in isolation to other agencies. All multi-agency services that are relevant to the experience and life of the child should be involved, particularly the statutory agencies, health, the police, and of course education, as well as children's social care. And we also need to consider the expertise that is within the third sector. For example, organizations with mental health specialisms, organizations with specialist knowledge around, excuse me, domestic abuse. Only those with appropriate expertise and skills should undertake child protection work. In the case of STAR, the social worker was a newly qualified social worker who was being supervised. And this was a highly complex case that needed an experienced specialist to be able to unpack what was happening. And this is a feature of child protection work across our system, as you will hear when we think about the independent review of children's social care. The recommendation is that leaders should be able to deliver excellent child protection responses and create the right organizational context for that to happen. And that goes to our multi-agency organizational context for frontline practice. Moving on to the specific recommendations of the review. Recommendation number 1, a new expert-led multi-agency model for child protection investigation, planning, intervention, and review should be put in place. There should also be an establishment of a national multi-agency practice standard or practice standards for child protection work, which outlines what are the expectations of child protection, multi-agency child protection practitioners and practice. So we should also be looking at strengthening local partners to ensure proper coordination and involvement of all agencies, particularly education, but also the third sector as well. Changes to multi-agency inspection to better understand local performance and drive improvement. And this is really calling back into focus the need to inspect local child safeguarding partnerships. A new role for child safeguarding practice review panel in driving practice improvement in safeguarding partners. And this is really ensuring that those who sit at the very top table have skills, knowledge, understanding necessary to be able to drive system-wide improvement within and beyond the organization within the context of a multi-agency safeguarding children's partnership. There should be a sharper focus on performance and better coordination of child protection policy in central government, and related to that is the more effective use of potential data to help professionals protect children. Within that is what are our mechanisms for sharing information in an effective and timely way, and overcoming the technological barriers that may exist that would prevent various databases from safely and securely and efficiently sharing required information. There's some specific practice improvements in relationship to domestic abuse, particularly understanding the impact of domestic abuse on children. Recommendations for the safeguarding partners. There needs to be robust multi-agency, that we need to ensure that robust multi-agency discussions are always held whenever it is suspected that a child may be at risk of suffering significant harm. And this is where we need to move away from single agency strategy discussions, but we need to ensure that strategy discussions and other multi-agency discussions related to child protection are truly multi-agency. Partners need to ensure that sufficient resources are in place from across all agencies for the necessary multi-agency engagement in child protection processes. For example, strategy discussions, Section 47 inquiries, and initial child protection conferences. Robust information sharing arrangements and protocols need to be in place, and that is the role of the partnership to ensure that they're in place across our system. And a key recommendation is that referrals should not be deemed to be malicious without a full and thorough multi-agency assessment, including speaking with the referrer and an agreement with an appropriate manager. And referrals should also not be described as malicious in professional conclusions due to the risks associated with that type of language. At which point now I'm going to stop and give the opportunity to ask any questions or raise any comments.
Hi, Paul. We haven't had any questions or comments in the chat yet, so please, if someone has something they would like to raise, please type it out for us. Thank you.
Okay. I will then, in the absence of comments, and by all means you can put comments in the chat whenever, and we'll try and respond to them at a decent interval. But let's go on to look at the Child Q report, which was published in March 2022 by City and Hackney Safeguarding Children Partnership. Okay, so this is a case that occurred in 2020, and this is quite unusual in that this was a case that was escalated up to the Safeguarding Children's Partnership in Hackney, City and Hackney, and they conducted a rapid review, and against the advice of the Child Safeguarding Practice Review Panel, they decided to commission a local child safeguarding practice review. The local partnership there said, despite the suggestion by the national panel that a local child safeguarding practice review was not needed, they nonetheless initiated one. The delegated decision to do this was made by the Independent Child Safeguarding Commissioner and ratified by the partners in line with City and Hackney Safeguarding Children's Partnerships written arrangements. And so they overrode the decision, or the advice, not the decision, the advice of the Child Safeguarding Practice Review Panel. And with hindsight, I think that was, of course, the right decision to make, simply because here we have a situation where a child was harmed not by the actions or omissions of their parent, but by the actions and omission of an institution that should have protected the child and should have had her best interest as the paramount consideration, and that was not the case. So by way of background, Child Q is a Black female child of secondary school age who was strip searched by female police officers from the Metropolitan Police Service. The search, which involved exposure of Child Q's intimate body parts, took place on the school premises without an appropriate adult being present and with the knowledge that Child Q was actually menstruating. No appropriate adult was in attendance. Teachers remained outside of the room, and Child Q's mother was not contacted in advance. In the event, no drugs were found either during the strip search or a follow-up search of the room in which Child Q had been waiting beforehand. Child Q was later allowed to return home, where she disclosed the events to her mother. Child Q described how she had been strip searched while she was menstruating. Due to the level of distress, her mother took her to the family GP, who made a referral for psychological support, and this led to Hackney Children and Family Services and resulted ultimately in this review. Just listening to the voice of the child and the family, I want to just have a few direct quotes from the report. The family said that the incident that happened, the child was treated not as a safeguarding issue, but it was treated as a criminal issue. Bearing in mind that the Children's Act 1989 and the European Convention on the Rights of the Child indicates that, or states that the rights of the child is, the safeguarding of the child is paramount, taking priority over any criminal investigation. Family also noted that professionals treated her as an adult and she was searched as an adult. This idea of adultification, which we'll explain a bit later on. Child Q, in terms of impact, was a changed person. She's not eating. Every time I find her, she's in a bath full of water and sleeping in the bath. She's not communicating with the family as she used to. She doesn't want to leave her room. She has panic attacks. She doesn't want to be on the road. She screams, she sees and hears police, and the family needs to reassure her. Continuing with the voice of the family do not believe that the officers would have treated a Caucasian child who was on a monthly period in the same way. Child Q was made to take off her pad, something so personal and exposed in such a way to strangers. Child Q was racially profiled, as the view of the family, and is subsequently borne out in the review due to her being black and her extreme large head of locks. So this child presenting had her hair in locks, and the association was dreadlocks, cannabis, and therefore she was treated in a particular way. She was made to bend over to spread her legs, use her hands to spread her buttock cheeks whilst coughing. She was not permitted to use the toilet despite her asking. She is now self-harming and requires therapy. She's traumatized and is now a shell of the bubbly child she was before. She was, from the time she was pulled out of her exam to the time she returned home, she was isolated, not given food or offered water. Where was the care, the family asked. It is now being circulated in the school that she's a big-time drug seller. Above all is related to the police's behavior to her. And at the root is something called adultification bias. So the report found that one feature believed to have significance to the experience of child Q is adultification bias. Adultification is a form of bias where children from Black, Asian, and other minoritized ethnic communities are perceived as being more streetwise, more grown up, less innocent, less vulnerable than other children. This particularly affects Black children who are viewed primarily as a threat rather than as a child who is in need of support and protection. A US study in 2017 by Georgetown's Law Center on Poverty and Inequality found that Black girls as young as 5 years old were seen as being in less need of protection and nurturing compared to their white counterparts. Research also showed that Black girls were 2.7 times more likely to be referred to the juvenile justice system, 2 times more likely to be disciplined for minor violations at school, and 20 times more likely to be charged with a crime. And whilst this is a US study, the report finds that these experiences are not isolated and are likely to be replicated in our system here in the United Kingdom. So the findings of the report. Finding number 1, the school was fully compliant with expected practice standards when responding to its concerns about child Q's smelling of cannabis and its subsequent search of child Q's coat, bag, scarf, and shoes. It's demonstrated a good curiosity by involved staff and alertness to school risks. However, stemming from there, it was clear that the school did not treat child Q as a child in need of help and protection, but rather a child under the suspicion of involvement in criminal activity. Finding number 2 is that the decision to strip child Q was insufficiently attuned to her best interest or privacy. Finding number 3, the school staff deferred their authority to that of the police on the police's arrival in school. They should have been more challenging, bearing in mind that schools are in the place or the position of parents, loco parentis, and they should have acted as any reasonable parent would have acted. They should have sought clarity about the actions intended to be taken by police, and all practitioners need to be mindful of their prima facie duty to uphold the best interests of children and, of course, to advocate on their behalf. Finding number 4, school staff had an insufficient focus on the safeguarding needs of child Q when responding to concerns about suspected drug use. In other words, if you have a child who is suspected of using drugs or dealing drugs, from a safeguarding point of view, we need to be thinking about whether or not that child is involved in any form of criminal exploitation. We need to be curious about where did the child get the drugs from. We need to be curious about why is the child dealing in school. And so therefore, what is our child protection response? And oftentimes the child protection response is in tandem with a policing and investigatory response, but even the policing and investigatory response needs to be conducted with a safeguarding lens. Finding number 5, the application of the law and the policy governing strip searching and children can be variable and open to interpretation. So there's a need for clarity regarding the guidance and policy related to strip searching. Finding number 6, the absence of any specific requirement to seek parental consent when strip searching children undermines the principles of parental responsibility and partnership working with parents to safeguard children. Finding number 7, the COVID-19 restrictions in place at the time appeared to have frustrated effective communication between the school staff and the Safer Schools officer. Finding number 8, having considered the context of the incident, the views of those engaged in the review, and the impact felt by child Q and her family, racism, whether deliberate or not, was likely to have been an influencing factor in the decision to undertake a strip search. And I have to say, upon reading the report, I found it incredibly helpful that the report challenged the idea of unconscious bias. No practitioner who is working with children and families should be in a situation where they are unconscious about their biases. It's very, very important. Myself speaking as a cisgendered African Caribbean male, I have to understand what my references are, what my biases are, and how those can interact with people I'm working with, including clients and other practitioners. And I should be aware of how my interactions can impact positively or negatively on service users and others, and I should put things in place positively to ensure that I mitigate against any abuse or disadvantage caused as a result of my biases. So let's move to recommendations. Recommendation number 1. The report recommends that a child safeguarding practice review panel should engage with the IOPC with a view to developing national guidance on the IOPC's interface with local child safeguarding practice review process. As a minimum, it should set out the arrangements for securing cooperation, accessing key staff for interview, and requirements for the timely sharing of information. Okay, recommendation number 2, that the Metropolitan Police Service should review and revise its recording system for stop and search to ensure that it clearly identifies and allows for the retrieval of the full range of activity under stop and search powers, including the ability to differentiate between different types of strip searches undertaken. And from that, you can read in between the lines to know that the information required by the review process was not forthcoming from the police. Recommendation number 3, the Department for Education should review and revise its guidance on searching, screening, and confiscation to include more explicit reference to safeguarding and amend its use of inappropriate language. Recommendation number 4, the Metropolitan Police Service should update its guidance to note and local policy to better emphasize the requirements for engaging an appropriate adult under the revised code of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984. Recommendation number 5, City of Hackney Safeguarding Children's Partnership should review and revise its awareness raising and training content to ensure that the Labinjo-Hughes case is referenced, along with a specific focus on reinforcing the responsibilities of practitioners to advocate for and on the behalf of the children they are working with and who are in their care. Recommendation number 6. Relevant police guidance, both local and national, governing the policy on strip searching children should clearly define a need to focus on the safeguarding needs of children and follow-up actions that need to be considered by way of helping and protecting children at potential risk. Recommendation number 7, the Central East Basic Command Unit should engage the local stop and search monitoring group account and other representative bodies to consider the lessons from this review and how the effectiveness of safeguarding as part of stop and search practice can be overseen through their respective activities. Recommendation number 8, where any suspicion of harm arises by way of concerns for potential or actual substance misuse, a safeguarding response is paramount. Practitioners should always contact children's social care to make a referral or seek further advice in such circumstances. Recommendation number 9, the Metropolitan Police Service should engage the College of Policing to explore potential improvements to the guidance concerning reasonable grounds involving stop and search activity with children. Recommendation number 10, alongside recommendation number 3, the Department for Education should review and revise its guidance on screening and confiscation to include a much stronger reference on the importance of keeping records and engaging parents as part of best safeguarding practice. Recommendation number 11, the Home Office and the National Police Chiefs Council should seek to strengthen the revised Code C of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1989, or to better define the engagement of parents, carers, guardians when strip searches that involve the exposures of intimate parts of the body are undertaken on children. Recommendation number 12, the local partnership should engage Safer Schools police officers and other community organizations to develop awareness raising, to develop an awareness raising program across schools and colleges about stop and search activity by the police. Continuing with recommendation 13, the Home Office and National Police Chief should, sorry, that's a repeat, please forgive me. So yeah, I think that is where we are in the, recommendation 13, the local partnership should continue its rolling program of multi-agency adultification training, and participation should be effectively focused on practitioners from police and schools, with the training and learning and development subgroup developing a process to specifically evaluate the impact of this training across these sectors. And number 14, the local partnership should expedite its work on developing an anti-racist charter and practical guides that support the eradication of racism, discrimination, and injustice across its local safeguarding arrangements. At which point I'm going to pause for any questions.
Thank you, Paul. So a question in the chat asks, are there any materials on adultification and racial profiling that can be used to train oneself and staff?
So there are lots of resources available. And when I say there are lots, there are a lot. There are a lot. The Children's Workforce Academy provides some training on inclusion, diversity, and anti-discriminatory practice, and this review will be woven into that. There are a range of training that is available. My challenge with your question, with the question, is that I could reel off literally hundreds of titles and books and things that you could look at. I think a good starting point is this review itself. There's also a recommendation, there's also within the review a 2017 report cited on adultification. There is an author by the name of Ibrahim X. Kendi, and the title of the book is How to Be Anti-Racist. A really, really helpful guide. And there are a range of other resources. This, particularly in the rise of Black Lives Matter and George Floyd, there has been a plethora of resources that can be used. I also want to reference that at the Designated Safeguarding Leads meeting last week, there was a very powerful presentation on equality, diversity, and inclusion with a list of resources that would be very useful. If you speak to colleagues in the education safeguarding team, Rita Dada, she will be able to put you in touch with some of the resources that were shared there.
Thank you, Paul. In the chat as well, I've shared the full ChildQ report available on the Surrey Safeguarding Children Partnership website, and then also a link to the book that Paul has just recommended. And another question we've received is, how is a child able to give consent to be strip searched, and why were the police not challenged on this?
Well, this is exactly the finding of the review. There is an account within the report itself of a designated safeguarding lead who works in the context of the school, and the view from that designated safeguarding lead was absolute shock. And they said that with all their years of practice, they would never have allowed such a thing to happen. The only explanation that can be made is the a priori assumption that this child was guilty of a crime. And therefore, because the child was judged as being guilty, they were no longer a child in need of protection, but a criminal in need of detection.
Thank you. And another question from the earlier reports we heard about Start and Arthur. Is there an example you can share of a referral that's been described as malicious and what this would mean?
Okay, so I don't work in the MASH team, but I do. From when I was in frontline practice, we used to have quite a few malicious referrals. For example, there was a family I was working with where there was a high level of coercive control and a very, very high level of domestic abuse, and so much so that the children were taken away from the father, and the mother and child were in a refuge for a long period of time. And on the child's file, it was do not disclose any information. Contact with the child had broken down because of father's inappropriate behavior. Now, what father would continually do is make referrals to children's social care, saying that the mother was unfit, that the mother was abusing substances, that she had a stream of partners coming through the door, and so on. And the social work team that was working with that family would investigate, would ask questions, and upon investigation, it became clear that the father's behavior was not only trying to coerce and control mother, but was also trying to coerce and control the social care and professional network around the family also. So just as the social worker was bombarded with referrals, complaints, similarly the school was bombarded with requests for information, referrals, and complaints. And what was very clear was that this father was behaving in a coercive way, not only to his partner or former partner, ex-partner, but also was attempting to coerce. So that's an example of where a referral is made maliciously. But I think the difference is that there was not a superficial exploration of what is malicious. There was a deep investigation and assessment as to whether or not something was malicious. And I think that was lacking in both cases. It was taken as at face value that, oh, the family doesn't like my new partner, or the family is homophobic. They're making malicious investigations, even when they had photographic evidence. And it's this thing where, and I think we need to be aware that people who are intent on harming children will do everything within their power to ensure that services do not see the harm they are perpetrating. And therefore, we need to be much more tenacious, much more robust, and much more curious in trying to understand, and less believing of what parents say is an explanation. So if somebody says to us, this bruise, oh, the child's clumsy, we need to then seek further evidence regarding, okay, how did this bruise actually happen? And we have to sometimes, you know, I think it was Eileen Monroe in her 2012 review said that child protection practice, effective child protection practice, involves the ability to think the unthinkable. And sometimes we have to start from a position that this child is being harmed unless you find evidence to the contrary. And I know that's not a good place to start for most of us, because we like to trust people and hope for the best. But in terms of safeguarding children, we have to assume the worst and then seek evidence that there is safety.
Thank you, Paul. And this question was asked following we heard about the Arthur and Starr reports, but it may be valid for Child Q as well. The person asks, what is Surrey doing specifically to ensure that we're following the recommendations?
Okay, so specifically, so in terms of Arthur, we are strengthening our assessment. We've asked questions particularly around pre-birth assessment, but also assessment and evaluation of cases. We're also working on professional curiosity, the need to ask questions, to be more probing, the need for authoritative practice, doing specific work around that. I have to say, when I read the Starr and Arthur review, my first thought is that this could easily happen here in Surrey, and therefore we need to be really attentive. I'm not saying that, and I have to say that Surrey is now moved out of inadequate into requires improvement as a safeguarding, as a children's social care system, and I think that's important for us to recognise. That there is a long way to go, and that all of us are part of that improvement. And I have to say that whilst I'm really, really proud and pleased in the great strides we've made to move out of intervention, I really do not feel content as a safeguarding practitioner or safeguarding leader within Surrey, because I still see us having debates and disputes that aren't necessarily focused on the well-being of children, but it's really about the particular views of each agency. So these are some things we see. We also see in terms of the work that we do in audit that there's a lot of challenges around holding families where they need to be held, working effectively together, sharing information, agencies having meetings that facilitate effective decision-making and planning for child protection work. There's a great deal of good work that is happening, but there is more to be done, is what I'm saying. And there's a whole raft of work that's happening to address many of the issues that are raised within the review. But I have to say, I am agitated in a healthy way for us to kind of sit down and work together to analyze particularly the Arthur and Starr review, and think about what this means for our system. And those discussions are ongoing at the executive, within the subgroups, and of course within teams across children's services.
Thank you, Paul. And one final question from the chat, asking, can ASC be more involved when appropriate?
ASC?
Whoever asked the question, would you like to elaborate, please?
Just typing something in the chat. Hi, Paul. Hi, Hannah.
Care, I believe.
Hi. What I find, and this isn't a criticism of adult social care, right, because I think they are incredibly stretched from what I pick up, but very often it feels like a lot of time is being used to try and get them on board when there is a parent who has a learning difficulty or disability and needs adult social care involvement to support them, that it's not something that is for children's social care to do.
Yeah. I get now. I didn't get the acronym.
Sorry, adult social care. Sorry.
Now I know exactly what
I think you're finding lots of people now typing it in, Paul.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I totally understand. You're absolutely right. And it's this whole thing about think family, see the child, see the parent, see the parent, see the child. And you're absolutely right in your observation that oftentimes adult social care can use the very, very high bar for adult safeguarding, which has to do with the Mental Capacity Act and so on and so forth. However, we need to be thinking about whenever we as children's workers are working with a family where there's parental substance misuse or where there's poor mental health, or where there are additional needs or neurodiversity, divergent needs that impact on parenting, and how we can work together with adult social workers to ensure that the family get the support they need, which will include from time to time this third sector, so that the children's workers can focus on safeguarding the children and not be distracted by what can be the overwhelming needs of parents. We've seen that in reviews locally
exactly
already.
Exactly. That is a really, really good point, Paul. And can I just also give a shout out to all the wonderful team, the mental health team, who I found invaluable working with families in Surrey, and the drug and the alcohol and the domestic abuse practitioners, and the family support workers, who seem to be very thin on the ground, but we really need more family support workers because they are often the backbone supporting the social workers. So just to say that, I've mentioned about resources in the chat, Paul. If you can raise the budget, that would be great.
Well, we're going to talk about the review of children's social care, which hopefully will say some of the things that you are finding, because I think there's high levels of resonance with what it is you're saying, but also there is about, I think it's 2.7 billion being made available. There's proposals around early help that we're going to talk about. What I propose we do is take a 5-minute comfort break and come back at 1:30, and then we'll have the final presentation and then close out. So if you can take a break and come back at 13:30, I shall see you then. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back. Okay, so we're going to now look at the independent review of children's social care, led by Josh McAllister, commissioned by the government. Just by way of background to the review, the government commissioned a review of children's social care, the whole system, which began in March 2021. The review involved gathering evidence from public engagement, research, conducting visits to local areas. The aim of the review was to put forth recommendations for a system that provides intensive help to families in crisis, that acts decisively in response to abuse, that unlocks the potential of wider family networks to raise children and to support in the raising of children, that puts lifelong loving relationships at the heart of the care system, that lays the foundation for a good life for those who have been in care. And the final report and its supporting evidence was published again the same week of the review of the murders of Arthur and Starr. And of course, there are important overlaps and connection points between both reviews, as you will see. The principles of the review were that the national government provided some clear objectives regarding children's social care. They wanted to explore how the system worked to meet children and families' needs, rather than making the children and families fit the system. They wanted to see a greater transparency and new mechanisms for learning and better inspection and intervention. They also wanted to see a highly skilled and knowledgeable workforce, and that resulted in better multi-agency working. So the report goes into nearly 300 pages and is organized into 9 key sections, which presents the evidence and findings of the report. So the first section has to do with the reset of children's social care. The second section is a revolution in family help, which has previously been understood as early help and child in need. A just and decisive system, unlocking the potential of family networks, transforming care, fixing the broken care market and giving children a voice, looking at the care experience and the identification of 5 missions for care experienced children. Section number 7 has to do with realizing the potential of the children's workforce. Number 8 had to do with a system that is relentlessly focused on children and families and improved outcomes for them. And then number 9 had to do with implementation. So let's think about a revolution in the early help system. So a new family help approach is needed to improve children's lives through supporting the family unit and strengthening relationships. And so this is the proposals around what used to be called early help, but is now understood as being the family help model, which includes bringing together early help and child in need. So streamlining of early intervention, which includes combining the targeted early help work and the work done through Section 17 of the Children's Act to minimize handovers and multiple assessments of families and maximize support. Consistent, transparent, and non-stigmatizing support. And what should happen is there should be a clear framework for setting out the eligibility for family help in sufficient detail to give a more consistent understanding of who should receive help and when, enabling families and family help practitioners to have a conversation about concerns rather than relying on process-led referral pathways, supporting families which are not eligible for support through universal and community services. In terms of the delivery of early help, There should be the establishment, or the report recommends the establishment of multidisciplinary teams with autonomy to make decisions and control budgets, making family help teams part of the communities in which they serve. Related to that is the need for investment and reform. And so there is a recommendation of investing roughly around £2 billion in government funding, incentivizing local partners to contribute ring-fenced funding once transformation is complete to ensure sustained investment. In terms of governance and accountability, there should be clearly defined outcomes, objectives, and effective models for delivering family help as part of the National Children's Social Care Framework, making funding for areas conditional upon meeting the goals of the framework. And they should consider legislating to put multidisciplinary family help teams on a statutory footing. So this is further children's legislation. And then using Ofsted inspections to reinforce a focus on families receiving high quality, evidence-led help, supporting children and families with differing needs, reviewing current legislation to support disabled children and their families, and strengthening the response from children's social care on supporting children, teenagers and older young people, and addressing poverty and addressing the ethnic disparities in terms of who gets help and when. That leads us to a just and decisive child protection system. So in terms of thinking through a just and decisive child protection system, the review considers the need for an expert child protection response, co-working all cases of significant harm by a new practitioner known as an expert child protection practitioner, who is an experienced social worker who works alongside family help teams. The hope of this is to improve multi-agency contributions to child protection processes by clarifying expectations on multi-agency capabilities for child protection through amendments to Working Together 2018, so that different professionals, including child protection pediatricians and specialist police officers, inform decisions, setting out effective practice models for joint working through a new national children's social care framework. The framework should also tackle extrafamilial harm, creating a bespoke child protection pathway through a child community safety plan to enable a robust child protection response to harms occurring outside of the family home. And this really speaks to the work that has been emerging from the University of Bedfordshire and Dr. Carleen Furman and others in relationship to developing an approach to contextual safeguarding. And so this approach really should integrate government funding into a single local response for extrafamilial harm in family help, devolving the responsibility for the national referral mechanism for children who experience modern-day slavery, trafficking to local areas, simplifying the experience of children in the youth justice system, and then supporting that with really good, high-quality information sharing, supporting local authorities, health, and the police and education to make the technical changes they need to effectively share data across their various systems and databases. Okay, and in terms of information sharing agreements and audits of practice, including having government setting targets related to information sharing systems so that these things are in place by 2027. We also want to see increases in parental engagement in child protection processes. So there's a real stronger sense of partnership rather than coercive response. Protecting and promoting effective practice for engaging families through the new National Children's Social Care Framework practice guidance, which offers parental representation to all families in child protection processes, and then thinking through the role of the courts in improving the quality and consistency of local judicial decision making through data sharing and learning, making proceedings less adversarial and more about improving parental engagement. The next section really has to do with unlocking the potential of family networks. The report makes the point that it does take a village to raise a child, and that there needs to be a greater recognition of kinship carers and a greater level of support for kinship carers. And the changes that are needed include making better use of family networks, which and part of that includes the proposal of a new legal right to family decision making, introducing the family network plans to support care through wider family networks. It includes backing kinship carers and introducing a new legal definition of kinship care and giving kinship carers the financial and practical support they need for children without having to register as foster carers. And then, of course, modernizing adoption, making contact arrangements between birth parents and adopted children and adoptive parents the default, facilitating technology-assisted methods of contact where it is appropriate to do so. And then a significant section has to do with transforming care. The report notes that the care system should be focused on children building loving relationships with people who care for them. And measures to achieve this include setting out new care standards, creating regional care cooperatives, and the regional care cooperatives will be responsible for planning, running, commissioning, and providing care provision in a particular region. That these regional care cooperatives, RCCs, would be owned and fully accountable to its constituent local authorities. That there would be an increased focus on foster care recruitment, including creating a national foster care recruitment program, providing more training and support, and giving more freedom to foster carers to make day-to-day decisions affecting children's lives using family group decision-making processes to identify the important adults in a child's life as potential foster carers. There's also the proposal to create a new legal right to advocacy as an opt-out rather than an opt-in. So the default setting is that you will have advocacy unless you choose not to. The proposal is replacing existing independent reviewing officer or IRO roles and with and Regulation 44 visitor roles within and concentrating that into one system that provides oversight from the Children's Commissioner for England. And then coming into now 5 clear missions of care. So number 1, loving relationships for children leaving care. And this is redesigning, the report proposes redesigning independent visitor schemes that provide family support or providing family support to children in care and care leavers, and introducing the idea of a new lifelong guardianship order which will allow young people to formally join the family of a non-related adult who is important to them. Increasing the proportion of care leavers attending university. And then, of course, in relationship to the attendance at university, ensuring that young carers, there are clear incentives for universities and a kite mark system in place for those universities that are doing well. New well-paid jobs for and apprenticeships for care leavers. And so this is providing an annual care leaver bursary up to the age of 25, allowing employers to use unspent apprenticeship money to levy funds to provide and tailor support. And then creating an accreditation scheme to recognize employers' commitment to supporting care leavers. Tackling care experience homelessness, which involves providing housing options to young people transitioning out of care, including a rent guarantor scheme, increasing the leaving care grant and removing local area connection test and the intentionally homeless practice, increasing the life expectancy of care experienced young people. And this really includes training professionals in identifying and responding effectively to mental health issues. It also includes improving local authorities' care leaver health support, and that includes publishing integrated care boards plans for progress on improving health, the health of those who are leaving care. And this includes commissioning research and gathering data on improved health outcomes for care experienced children. And then we come to the area of realizing the potential of the workforce. And within realizing the potential of the workforce, it really is about setting out a career development framework and addressing pay disparities that provides an early career framework for the first 5 years of the profession, enabling career progression without leaving direct practice through an expert practitioner pathway, creating national pay scales to increase consistency across the UK and to reward expertise, reducing the reliance on agency social workers and introducing new national rules on when and how agency staff can be used, developing a not-for-profit regional staff bank for temporary social workers, cutting back on bureaucracy and increasing the resources for direct work with families, improving care management systems to reduce time spent on recording, and creating national and local systems for frontline workers to channel rules and bureaucracy that get in the way of direct work, requiring social workers to spend at least 100 hours a year in direct practice, trialing ways to increase workers' ability to and their availability to work outside of normal hours, developing the wider social care workforce, defining the skills needed by family support workers. And this goes to the point that was made earlier on about increasing the capacity within family support, including supporting development, requiring professional registration for all children home staff, establishing leadership programs for new children home managers, supporting leadership, investing in leadership development programs aligned with the proposed report reforms, and providing and addressing the racial disparities that exist within children's social care leadership. Moving on to a system that is focused on outcomes for children. Really this involves establishing a national children's social care framework which sets out the purpose, objectives and outcomes of children's social care and the evidence as to how this will be achieved in a national framework which provides a scorecard of indicators to measure how local areas are delivering its objectives and outcomes. It also will involve providing practice guidance that sets out the best ways of achieving the framework's objectives, using data and feedback to prompt local and national learning to improve services, strengthening multi-agency working by amending working together to set out clear and equal operational responsibilities for partners, overseen by the Director of Children's Services, but publishing the minutes of meetings, financial contributions, ensuring that all individual agencies inspectorate frameworks include a focus on joint working, that joint inspection is triggered when the concerns are raised, and that schools and education providers are included as a statutory partner, making government funding contingent on partners' own financial contributions to the work of multi-agency safeguarding. And then, of course, improving national government leadership, streamlining government programs to support the reforms, moving youth justice policy to the Department for Education, addressing structural problems in how children's social care is funded, updating the government funding formula to better direct resources to ensure changes in policies are accompanied by additional funding. This goes to the funding question that was asked earlier on. Improving inspection and intervention, which also includes additional transparency around Ofsted judgments, ensuring that inspections are child focused, and updating the scope of inspections to support the reforms, including strengthening the Department of Education's intervention powers to address inadequate and drifting local authorities, establishing a national data and technology task force that will support in driving improvements in priority areas so that we will have a more effective information sharing, because we have systems that are able to talk to each other and information protocols in place that facilitate the effective sharing of information. Okay, we're almost there. In terms of implementation, the steps needed to achieve the proposed reforms include a single 5-year reform program, so that these are delivered by 2027, and then 2.6 billion of new spending over the next 4 years, and oversight from the Secretary of Education, who will be responsible for holding others to account and reporting annually to Parliament on progress in relationship to the implementation of the proposed reforms. In terms of the government response, the government has set out initial measures in response to the review. They've set up an implementation board of sector experts and people with experience of the care system. They're implementing the new evidence-based framework for all professionals working within children's social care. And so that is the most recent statement, at which point I'm going to stop sharing and open up for any questions or responses.
Hi, Paul. So no questions have come into the chat so far, but just a couple of comments that people have made throughout the presentation today. So one person has raised that there can be a lack of continuity and consistency within involvement with the family, which means that families can have things missed, and often they have to have many different practitioners starting again from scratch.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. My own reflection, having worked with children and families for coming up to 30 years, is that we need to have a level of honesty as a system, that there are some families for whom we need to make a lifelong commitment. There's some families that we will be working with where we are not going to have them on a child protection plan for just 2 years. That there's an expectation that when these families are hovering at the edge of concern, at the edge of care, and all it takes with some families is for a washing machine to break down, and then you have a crisis. And so we need to come alongside families for a longer period of time, and I'm hoping that the Child in Need and family support proposals within this review will address some of that, so that we've got practitioners and services that are able to walk along families for the lifetime of the children within those families and even longer. And I think there is going to the point I was made about working effectively with adults, is that we do need to have an understanding that there's some adults who are always going to need some form of help, and we need to have services that are around that way. Reflecting on that, so the average person comes and stays within a role for about 3 to 5 years, and then they're promoted or they move on. What we need to then do is build in continuity, so that in the light of people moving on or getting a promotion or dropping out of the profession, we've got systems in place that ensures continuity of care and support. And I wish I had the answer to that. I would be making millions as a consultant if I did, but that's what I think is needed, that continuity. And just my closing remark on this whole issue of continuity, I think about schools, and I think primary schools from reception to year 6 are in a child's life, and then secondary schools from year 7 going to year 11 and sometimes 12 and 13, and they are consistently in that child's life. And it seems to me that if we can create services around schools where you get that strong continuity of care. I know school teachers who know parents, grandparents, and now new children. They've got 3 generations of the family in the view of members of staff. And when I say members of staff, I'm not just talking about teaching staff, non-teaching staff as well. And so it's really, where do we put our emphasis in terms of who's going to be able to give continuity of care? Sorry, I've been rambling, I'm going to stop.
Thank you, Paul. And another question we've received is noting that the government has set up a national implementation board, but has the government actually accepted the recommendations of the review or committed to putting any more money into the children's social care system as suggested?
So you will see from my last page, the government has set out their response. This is their commissioned review. And the government will need to think really carefully about how they implement it. And what I will say is the government, they have made a commitment and they've got an implementation plan. It's going to be interesting to see what happens. And so the government have been characteristically, I don't want to say, there is a level of commitment, but what they've not said is, yeah, we're going to do this. What they've said is we receive it, this is our initial response, and we're setting up things to respond to it. I think we're in a very similar moment to the Lambing Review following Victoria Klimbay, which resulted in the Children's Act 2004. We are in a very, very similar period, and I suspect that the legislation and the work frameworks that result from this are going to be far-reaching. That's my feeling. And within the report, and I'm really grateful for Josh McAllister and the team, they have made the very clear point that this is not going to be a situation where we can put the responsibility on local authorities without seeking additional investment and funding from central government. Okay.
Thank you. I can't see any further questions or comments into the chat, so we will be wrapping up today's session. Thank you everyone for joining us, and I'll just pass over to Paul to do his final remarks.
No worries. So just to say, thank you everybody. This will be my last one, but there will be another briefing in around the November time. We would like you to complete the feedback form that will be placed in the chat. Your feedback is important for us to kind of continue to get better. And Anna will be sending out a follow-up email thanking them and inviting you to give your views. We will also give you a PDF of the PowerPoint in today's session, and any additional information. There will also be some links to our websites and to other websites for you to download relevant information. Thank you so much for taking the time today. I wish you a really good afternoon.
Don't go, Paul. Stay. Don't leave. Sorry. Oh God, we're all panicking now. Everyone's saying, "What are you saying?" Your last time.
What I will say is that I am really grateful to the partnership development team, because we have a really solid team of experienced and really good partnership development officers. We're out to recruit, and I came from somewhere else, and I am sure that there will be somebody at least as good as, and I'm hoping better, that will be able to take Surrey to the next level.
Well done, Paul. Thank you.
Paul,
You've been brilliant.
You just threw that in very casually, Paul. This will be my last time. I'm trying to make sense of that, Paul. No way. Oh, Paul, thank you so much, honestly. Well, I'll call you. Thanks, Hannah, as well. Thanks, everyone. Thank you.
Have a great afternoon. Thank you so much for your very kind comments, and I wish all of you the very, very best. I'm not going immediately, so I'm going to be